By late afternoon, balloons shimmered beneath the dim lights of the church hall, their colors reflected in frosting stains and paper crowns. The air smelled of sugar and effort. For a brief hour, I believed my daughter's 9th birthday would stay simple laughter, music, and the soft pride that comes from watching her feel loved. Then Mom arrived. Patricia always carried chaos disguised as affection. She floated in wearing pearls and control, the kind that turns a celebration into a performance. She kissed Sienna's cheek, called her my little scholar, and began scanning the room like she was measuring its worth. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the warning my therapist once called emotional weather. I smiled anyway. The storm came when she cleared her throat near the cake, her voice slicing through laughter like glass through frosting. She announced with calm conviction that Sienna's college fund would help Ivy, my younger sister, pay her debts. Family helps family, she said, like a sermon. For a second, no one moved. The music stopped, forks hovered. I felt every eye reach for my reaction. I set my cup down. My voice stayed level. You mean the account I closed last month? Mom blinked, reaching for her phone, her expression folding from confidence to disbelief. Then came the gasp, the realization, and the trembling sound of a woman losing her last illusion of control. In that silence, I didn't flinch. The boundary had been set long before her outburst. She was only discovering it now. If this moment shook you, tell me what you would have done in my place. Your comment might help another parent facing their own storm. Morning light had a way of making my kitchen feel both safe and temporary, like a pause between storms. I remember that week clearly, the one when my mother's voice became more persistent, more polished in its persuasion. Every call from Patricia began with small talk and ended with concern about Ivy. She's drowning in bills, she said once, and I could almost hear the moral trap setting itself. I wasn't cruel. I had lent money before, but this was different. She was circling around something larger, something that felt too close to Sienna's future. I caught myself checking my daughter's savings statement one morning, the numbers sitting there quietly, holding years of scraped effort, extra shifts, canceled vacations, evenings of saying no to myself so I could say yes to her someday. That balance wasn't just money, it was proof that I could do something my own mother never did: plan ahead. The following day, I made an appointment at the financial office downtown. The advisor explained the 529 plans secure, state-protected, inaccessible to anyone but me and Sienna when the time came. I listened, nodded, and signed. There was relief in the small sound of the pen against paper, like a lock clicking shut. When I told Luke, he didn't question it. We weren't a couple anymore, but co-parenting had carved out a space of quiet cooperation. He only said, "Smart move," and I felt a rare moment of partnership between two people who had already learned the cost of ignoring red flags. Mom called that evening. Her tone was bright, rehearsed. She mentioned Ivy again, how family was supposed to share burdens, how helping one helps all. I let her speak until she ran out of conviction. I didn't argue. Silence is a powerful boundary when used with intent. Later, I sat in Sienna's room while she slept. Her hands were still small, her breathing soft, her future untouched by the mistakes of adults. I thought about the generations of women before us, my grandmother who lived in obligation, my mother who weaponized sacrifice, and now me, standing somewhere between defiance and duty. I wanted to end the cycle without losing the parts of love that were still worth keeping. The next morning, I transferred the funds completely, closing the old joint account that Mom once had access to for emergencies. That word emergency had always meant something different to her. For me, it was fire, sickness, survival. For her, it meant feelings, appearances, debts that could never be repaid because they weren't financial to begin with. After the transfer, I went for a long drive along the edge of town. The leaves were changing, the first hints of cold folding into the air. My mind was still, but underneath it, something in me knew. She would notice. People like my mother always notice when control slips out of their hands. When I got home, a text was waiting. Just one line. Family shouldn't hide things. No greeting, no signature, but I could hear her tone as clearly as if she'd whispered it into my ear. I stared at it, realizing she must have checked the account and found the absence of what she believed was hers to manage. I deleted the message, not out of defiance but preservation. Some boundaries don't require explanations, they only need enforcement. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the streetlights draw thin lines across the floor. I wasn't proud, but I was certain. The decision had already been made in my mind long before the paperwork was filed. It was just the first time I'd chosen to act before being cornered. And somewhere between the flicker of the lamp and the hum of the refrigerator, I realized something simple. Peace doesn't always feel peaceful when it begins. Sometimes it sounds like a door closing softly behind you. By the time the sun rose on Monday, my phone had already become a battlefield. Notifications stacked like judgment, missed calls from aunts, cousins, even distant relatives who rarely remembered Sienna's birthday but suddenly cared about family values. Their messages came coded in disappointment, the kind that pretends to be concern but stings like accusation. Mom must have told them her version of the story. I could almost hear the words she used: selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. Each text felt like a small echo of her voice, multiplied through people who had never once asked what I needed. The group chat that had been silent for months now pulsed with life screens full of people defending a woman they only saw on holidays. I didn't respond. Silence, again, felt safer than truth. But the quiet came with its own kind of ache. My chest held that dull heaviness, the one that comes when you're right and still feel wrong for it. Later that day, Dad called. Harold had never been the kind to raise his voice or take sides. His version of love was restraint, and his silence had always been his shield. When he spoke, it was careful, measured, like someone navigating a house full of sleeping ghosts. He said Mom was upset, that she felt humiliated. I could tell he wanted to fix it, but there was nothing to fix without breaking me in the process. After we hung up, I made tea and stared at the steam curling against the kitchen window. My mind wandered to Ivy. I wondered if she knew what Mom had done at the party, or if she was too lost in her own financial panic to care. Ivy had always been the gentle one, quick to cry, quick to lean. Mom adored her fragility. It gave her purpose. I used to think being strong made me difficult, but now I understood it only made me less controllable. By evening, more messages arrived, short, clipped statements of disappointment. You embarrassed your mother. It could have been handled privately. You've forgotten where you came from. I read each one slowly, letting them dissolve into the part of me that no longer wanted to explain myself. I opened my laptop and searched for legal information about parental rights to a child's savings account. The words were clinical, detached, but grounding. Only the custodian has authority. I exhaled. The law, at least, didn't care about family guilt. The next morning, while packing Sienna's lunch, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. I looked tired, older than I remembered, but steadier. There was something liberating about knowing the worst had already been said. You can only be painted as the villain once before you realize the freedom of not defending yourself. Still, part of me ached for the small hope that someone in the family might understand. I checked my messages one last time. There was one from Ivy, just a single sentence. I'm sorry she involved you. It wasn't an apology that fixed anything, but it was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in days. For a while I sat with it, that simple acknowledgement. It didn't erase the noise, but it reminded me that clarity doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through people who see the storm from the outside and choose not to join it. By the end of the week, the messages stopped. Not because they understood, but because outrage always burns itself out when it doesn't get fed. I learned that people don't need the truth to take sides. They only need a story that flatters their version of loyalty. I deleted the group chat, blocked the numbers, and turned off notifications. For the first time in a long while, my phone went silent, and the silence didn't scare me. It sounded like peace disguised as absence. Before going to bed, I opened the small safe in my closet where Sienna's documents rested: birth certificate, trust papers, school forms. My hands lingered on them for a moment. They felt heavier than paper should, maybe because they held the proof that my choices were real, that they mattered beyond the noise of other people's opinions. When I closed the safe, I realized something else. Family may turn on you, but they can't rewrite what's already been secured. The cafe smelled of old espresso and tension, the kind of place where words lingered longer than they should, trapped in the steam above chipped cups. I chose the seat by the window, where I could see people walking past free, unaware, unburdened by family loyalty disguised as love. When my parents arrived, the air shifted. Mom walked in first, spine straight, lips tight, her perfume sharp enough to make the moment feel rehearsed. Dad followed, carrying his quiet the way others carried weapons, soft but ready. I noticed the space between them, a familiar silence that had once filled our house. Mom sat across from me, folding her napkin with deliberate precision. I didn't need her words to know what she wanted. The weight of expectation was heavy enough to bend the table. I told myself to breathe, to stay grounded, to remember that silence doesn't mean surrender. She began talking, not with apologies but with grievances. I didn't respond. My mind drifted to the sound of Sienna's laughter at home, how pure it had been compared to the noise here. I wondered if peace always cost someone their illusion of control. Dad tried to smooth the edges, saying things about understanding, about forgiveness. But even his calm voice couldn't bridge what had already fractured. He didn't see what I saw, how every word Mom spoke was less about regret and more about reclaiming authority. She wanted acknowledgement, not resolution. I listened as she spoke of sacrifice, of years spent holding the family together. Her version of history had no room for contradiction. I felt the familiar sting of invisibility, the same feeling I had as a child when obedience was love and silence was respect. But now, I was neither a child nor obedient. I had built my own foundation, one she couldn't rearrange. My chest tightened as her words turned sharp. She called my decision cold, said I'd humiliated her. I let the accusations fall without catching them. I had already learned that defending myself only fed her hunger to win. Control thrives on argument, peace thrives on stillness. Dad's gaze flickered between us, helpless, like someone watching two versions of truth collide. He wanted me to bend, the way he always had for her. But bending was how I lost myself last time, and I was done losing. For a moment, I almost pitied her the way she clung to her narrative, as if rewriting it could undo what she'd done. But pity isn't love, it's the echo of it after trust disappears. I realized then that what she called family unity was just obedience under a prettier name. She paused long enough for me to feel her disappointment press against the air. I knew she was waiting for me to apologize, to make her whole again. Instead, I met her eyes and stayed silent. There's a power in refusal that no apology can match. When I finally spoke, my words were measured. Not angry, not cruel, just final. I told her that I would no longer carry her version of sacrifice, that Sienna's future was not a family project but a personal responsibility. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't break. She never does. Control doesn't vanish, it retreats, waiting for its next moment. Dad reached for his coffee, hands trembling slightly. His silence felt like permission to both of us to stop pretending. I stood up, feeling the floor steady beneath my feet. For once, I didn't need her approval to walk away. As I left, I didn't look back. I didn't need to see her expression to know it would mirror the same shock she wore at the birthday party, the realization that I'd drawn a boundary she couldn't cross. Outside, the autumn air was cool, the world unbothered by the quiet collapse of a relationship inside that cafe. I inhaled, let the bitterness settle, and exhaled the kind of relief that doesn't feel good yet but still feels right. Some endings don't come with closure. They arrive like the final drop of a storm that's already passed, leaving silence where thunder used to live. The week felt heavier than usual, though nothing visible had changed. The mornings came quietly, but the quiet wasn't peace, it was the pause before something inevitable. On Thursday, the sun was pale and thin, the kind of light that made everything look fragile. I left work early to pick up Sienna, grateful for the simple routine of waiting in the car line, coffee cooling beside me, radio low. Then I saw her. Patricia stood by the gate, her posture firm, her presence out of place among teachers and parents. She was dressed like she belonged somewhere more formal, as if the occasion required armor. For a moment, I thought I might be wrong, that it couldn't be her, that even she wouldn't come here. But she turned her head, and there it was, that practiced calm, the mask she wore when she was about to cross a line and call it love. My chest tightened. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pickup line moved forward, slow as breath. I could have ignored it, could have pretended I hadn't seen her, but pretending was what had gotten us here. When Sienna appeared, her backpack nearly half her size, she noticed her grandmother before she noticed me. I watched her small body hesitate, confusion clouding her face, and then she took a step back. Children don't understand manipulation, but they feel it. They always feel it. From my seat, I saw the school security officer approach Patricia, polite but firm. There was a brief exchange, gestures of discomfort, a boundary being reinforced by someone who didn't even know our story. I rolled down my window slightly, the autumn air biting against my skin, and waited until Sienna spotted the car. She ran toward me, her little sneakers hitting the pavement like punctuation. Driving away, I could see Patricia in the rearview mirror, standing still, her arms crossed, expression unreadable. It struck me then not as shock, but as confirmation. She had come to claim something that was never hers. Access, control, the right to rewrite what had already been written. At home, Sienna was quiet. She unpacked her backpack, pulled out a crumpled drawing of her school project, and asked if Grandma was mad. The question hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. I wanted to protect her innocence, but I also wanted to tell her the truth that love without respect isn't love, it's ownership. Instead, I just said she didn't do anything wrong, and that sometimes adults forget their boundaries. When she went to her room, I sat at the dining table, staring at the half-empty glass of water I'd left that morning. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the realization that calm no longer protected me. I had been measured, patient, kind. I had tried reason, silence, and distance. But this was trespassing, not metaphorical but real. A line had been crossed, and there was no mistaking it this time. I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. I drafted an email to the school administration, formal and precise, requesting that Patricia's name be removed from all pickup permissions. I explained briefly that contact with her was not authorized. The words looked sterile on the screen, but behind them was exhaustion, the kind that follows years of being tested. When the email was sent, I leaned back and let the quiet settle again. My pulse slowed, but something colder replaced it: resolve. I had spent too long hoping she would change, believing that logic could fix what was rooted in entitlement. You can't reason with someone who confuses boundaries with betrayal. The next day, the principal confirmed the restriction. It felt like a small victory, not triumphant but necessary, like locking a door you wish didn't need a key. That evening, I watched Sienna sleep. Her breath was steady, her body soft with safety. I realized this was the first time in weeks my shoulders had unclenched. Love, I thought, isn't about who stays, it's about who protects. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, steady and cold, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had turned into clarity, and clarity was louder than any apology I would never receive. It began with the sound of rain against the kitchen window, soft, deliberate, almost rhythmic, the kind of rain that doesn't flood or frighten, but reminds you that seasons change whether you're ready or not. I had just finished washing the dishes when my phone lit up again. Her name appeared like a ghost that refused to rest. Patricia. The messages came in clusters, each one dressed in guilt and nostalgia. We're still family. I just want to talk. You're being unfair. I read them once, maybe twice, then set the phone down. I didn't delete them, not yet. There's a strange comfort in visible proof of what you're walking away from. For years, boundaries had been theoretical, a word I'd read in therapy books but never practiced in real life. Now, they had weight. They had form. They existed in phone settings, school records, and the silence between us. That night, I sat at the dining table with a notebook open, the same one where I used to write grocery lists and weekend plans. This time, I wrote something different. A letter not to send, but to release. I wrote that I loved her once, that love had shaped me, even when it hurt. I wrote that respect was not rebellion, and distance was not punishment. I wrote that my daughter deserved a version of family that didn't demand apology as entry. When I was done, I folded the page and placed it in the drawer beside the old family photos, where truth could live quietly without needing to be spoken aloud. The next morning, I blocked her number. It was both an ending and an act of self-preservation. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was structured. It had shape. It had intention. Weeks passed. The noise faded. I didn't realize how much of my life had been spent reacting until there was nothing left to react to. Mornings became lighter. Coffee tasted less bitter. I started taking walks with Sienna before school, her hand fitting perfectly in mine, the rhythm of her chatter washing away what used to ache. One afternoon, I received a letter handwritten, her signature at the bottom, familiar and foreign all at once. The handwriting had softened with age, but the tone hadn't. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation disguised as sentiment, asking me to be the bigger person. I placed it back in the envelope and tucked it beneath a stack of unpaid bills. Some messages don't need answers. They need to expire quietly. That weekend, I changed the locks. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. Love and access aren't the same thing. Protecting my peace wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Luke came by to drop off some papers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt unguarded in my own space. He noticed it too. The absence of chaos had a presence of its own. When he left, I looked around the house and realized it had become a reflection of me: less clutter, less noise, more truth. I thought about calling Ivy, but stopped myself. Compassion doesn't always require contact. Sometimes, it's enough to wish someone peace from a distance. That night, Sienna crawled into my lap with her bedtime book, the one about constellations and distant stars. She asked what it meant that light takes years to travel. I told her it means we can still see something long after it's gone. She nodded, content, and drifted off in my arms. When I carried her to bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time, I didn't look like someone's daughter trying to please. I looked like someone's mother trying to heal. Later, I stood by the window again, listening to the same steady rain. Somewhere out there, Patricia still existed unchanged, perhaps unrepentant, but no longer inside the borders of my peace. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you lock because you finally learned who deserves the key. And sometimes closing that door is not about anger or revenge. It's about survival, and the quiet courage it takes to choose yourself after a lifetime of being chosen for. The months that followed were quieter, not in a lonely way, but in a way that made room for breathing again. The absence of chaos had texture. It felt like sunlight through clean glass, steady and honest. My days began to build their own rhythm. Breakfast with Sienna, work that didn't drain me, evenings spent without waiting for an argument that would never come. Sometimes healing doesn't look dramatic. It looks like a Tuesday that passes without anxiety. It looks like being able to make a decision without explaining it to anyone. One morning, while folding laundry, I found a small envelope tucked between Sienna's clothes. Inside was a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sundae. She had written our names, mine, hers, and one for the dog we didn't even have yet. No mention of anyone else. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. Children have a way of reflecting truth without realizing it. Her world was smaller now, but safer. I've learned that protecting peace often looks like cruelty to those who benefit from your chaos. Patricia would probably still call me ungrateful. Maybe she tells people that I turned my back on family. Maybe she truly believes it. I don't need to correct her version anymore. Let her story stand. Mine doesn't need an audience to be true. There was a time when silence felt like weakness. Now, it feels like choice. I used to think strength meant confrontation, raising your voice, demanding acknowledgement. But strength, I've learned, can also mean staying still when others expect reaction. It's knowing that walking away isn't running, it's reclaiming direction. Boundaries don't end relationships. They define them. They say, this is where I stop and you begin. They're not punishment. They're maps for people who keep getting lost in the name of love. I still see traces of her sometimes, a recipe in her handwriting, an old voicemail I forgot to delete. Grief hides in ordinary places, waiting for small openings. But grief, I've realized, isn't always about loss. Sometimes it's the body adjusting to peace after years of bracing for harm. Sienna's growing fast now. She laughs more, asks deeper questions, and trusts my answers without hesitation. I think that's what breaking the cycle looks like. Not perfection, but presence. She'll never have to unlearn what love means. She'll grow up understanding that care without control can exist, that loyalty doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes I wonder if my mother ever feels the emptiness I left behind, not as punishment but as a mirror. Maybe one day she'll understand that control was never love, that taking from others isn't giving, that silence can be a form of truth. But even if she doesn't, I've stopped making her understanding a condition for my peace. Healing isn't symmetrical. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or apology. It's the slow rebuilding of your life when no one's watching. It's teaching your daughter that safety is sacred. It's realizing that forgiveness isn't letting someone back in, it's letting yourself move on. I think often about that day at the church hall, the balloons, the cake, the moment she announced her betrayal like it was generosity. I don't replay it with anger anymore. I replay it as the moment I finally chose myself. Every story has a turning point. Mine just happened to be disguised as a birthday. Now, when I walk into that same community hall for school events, I don't feel the ache I used to. I see Sienna smiling, surrounded by people who cheer for her without expectation. That's what rebuilding looks like, not revenge, not triumph, just peace earned through pain. And here's what I've learned. Love without boundaries becomes debt. Family without respect becomes obligation. But when you learn to draw a line not out of anger, but out of self-worth, you stop inheriting wounds that were never yours to carry. So, if someone's watching this, standing on the edge of a similar choice, wondering whether keeping the peace is worth losing yourself, hear me clearly. Peace kept at the cost of yourself isn't peace. It's submission. Choose the silence that heals, not the one that hides. Choose yourself, even when it makes others uncomfortable. That's not betrayal, that's growth.